Thank you, Tech Mahindra, for inviting us for this exciting panel. And congratulations on the 25 years of engineering. It's a great achievement. I have a great set of panelists with me, Preet, Tom, Ashok, and Girish. And Girish, if you can probably unmute your line. What we're going to talk about is just step back a little bit. We had some very interesting conversation, the last panel with Ajay, and you also had several keynote speakers. We went into a lot of detail on technology. So what we want to do is initially want to step back and talk about some of the macro trends which has changed over the last 18 months, which is going to be almost irreversible. And we touch upon some of those. Then we talk about how engineering is changing to keep in response to some of these macroeconomic changes. And then if you have time, touch upon some of the ways in which companies are developing their capability. Ajay touched upon some of those, but if you have time, we dig a little bit more deeper on those aspects. So those are three key aspects we want to cover. Let's start with the big changes in macroeconomic trends, right? You're starting to go into a world which is now into dual mode world, which have US and China, and there is also a lot of supply chain re-architecture happening across the world. We talked about the convergence of all the technologies, being AI and digital thread and all of this coming up. Sustainability and ESG is going to come back strongly in 2019. That was a big focus. During COVID, it reduced a bit in coming back. There's also COVID-led trends around future of work, hybrid work, and how people build products is completely changing. How you engage and innovate is completely changing. So a lot of these interesting trends. So what we want to do is first is touch upon some of the trends from the perspective, the vantage point of some of our panelists. Preet, we want to start with you. You work with, like us, you work with companies across industry segments. Anybody who builds any kind of physical product. How are these? What are some big macro changes which is going to impact engineering going forward?
Thank you very much, Pari. And so I am fortunate to be CTO for Ansys. We are an engineering modeling and simulation company. And we work across, we help our customers develop and manufacture the most amazing products across different verticals: aerospace, automotive, healthcare, manufacturing, and high tech. And so the macro change that has happened is people, when they are innovating in a new product, they typically imagine a new product. They will enter that product design in a CAD tool, and they do a little bit of simulation. And then they used to build hardware prototypes to test. Maybe they'll build 3 different prototypes, test it in the lab and say, yeah, this is working, that is not working, let's proceed with this, and then they sort of manufacture it, right? So simulation was used as sort of a complementary thing to physical prototyping, but not as a driver view, because simulation was not as accurate enough sort of 10 years ago. And therefore, in the aerospace world, people used to have to build a wind tunnel where you put a clay model of a wing and you put wind at 600 miles per hour and you see if the wing actually lifted or not. These days, with the accuracy of computational fluid dynamics, right? And again, we have a software called Fluent. If we say, we essentially create a virtual wind tunnel, and if we say this wing is going to fly, it is going to fly. If we say this wing is going to stall, it will stall. So essentially what has happened is we have enabled our customers to essentially remove the need for physical prototyping and do the entire prototyping, what we call rapid prototyping or virtual validation, completely on the computer, enabled by high performance computing, right? All the supercomputings and so on. But that's the big change that is happening. And the second one is all this computing is moving to the cloud. So essentially we are helping our customers innovate, build completely different products, totally sort of virtually instead of building physical prototypes, thereby reducing the cost of R&D and reducing the time to innovate. Thank you, Barry.
Thanks, Preet. So great. So both in terms of how they build their products and how they even using the simulation technology, because you're moving into cloud and people working from home makes it a lot easier. I'm diving into Tom. G current, and one of the big areas around everybody talking about is around the sustainability focus, and ESG being a big area. A company like BlackRock are almost becoming an activist investor in driving that the charter with every company they invest in. And you being in the center of it, how is the last 18 months changed the focus around sustainability, and how are you seeing your product? Maybe you can talk a little bit about G current so people have context.
Yeah, we're very fortunate. We've been in the energy saving business for our entire history, even back to 100 plus years. That will continue to accelerate. The LED technologies continue to advance, but they're plateauing a little bit. The addition is really on controls, and then how we use controls and software to eke out that extra, call it 5 or 10% energy that will continue to be optimized, and it's real. The other thing that's exciting for our company specifically is on the horticulture side. So as everyone thinks more and more about sustainability, reducing, miles traveled, that also is happening in how commercial agriculture goes to market. So building more greenhouses that will leverage LED technology. So there are two very important trends that have really accelerated and activated in the U.S. And also in Europe, very much so. So that is an important aspect of our business in terms of those social responsibilities.
Got it, Tom. And any other major macro trend which you have seen play out and which is almost reversible going forward? What do you think?
Absolutely. I'll touch on two other kind of themes. One is on our employees, right? I think engineers are always very passionate about this. See it even more on the social side, where the talent and competition is still very fierce, but they want to be working on something that emotionally and drives improvement in society. There'll be roles that will absolutely stay permanent remote from home work jobs. And then also see travel in the engineering world continue to still be depressed. I think companies will spend and focus on customer first, but on the engineering side, as we've globalized, really leveraging those global teams and some of the remote tools that have really improved over the last 18 months. And then the next one is really on the supply chain side. We'll continue to see more flexibility needed to handle the demand and the change or scarcity in semiconductors. And then also as talent moves from from company to company or from projects to projects, we need to build more resilient engineering teams. So still domain expertise is going to be absolutely critical, but people also have to be able to be flexible, and our organizations have to be flexible to be able to adapt and change to business environments.
Very interesting. The future of work, and it's fundamentally changed based on all the trends, which is becoming irreversible. Girish, you've been in a very interesting segment, and you mentioned it would be great if you can talk a little bit about Suez history of the company, and you deal with water and across the world, right? And from a city to a country to a municipality and things like that. So give us a little bit, in terms of how inflection points your company has seen over the last 100 years, and talk about what you see going forward post-COVID scenario in terms of your business and how you see it evolving.
Hey, thanks, Pari. Glad to be talking to this panel and on this forum. I mean, so Suez as such, it's a 160-year-old company, and our history began with the Suez Canal. And, since then, I think, when you actually correlate it with the digital piece that we are looking at, I always see that, digital is a transformation that cannot be looked at partly. It has to be looked at holistically. When you look at digital, it is about people, processes, and technologies. And you can't really look at just the technologies and then try and apply it to, at least this industry where we are in water environment, where we do a lot of solid waste management, the water treatment, wastewater treatment. You need to really look at all the three together. It has to be an integrated offering, which is a solution to the customer. There's no products here. And so when we look at the 160-year-old transformation of this company, when at some point of time where people used to actually take water from the rivers directly and then throw back the wastewater back into the rivers without treatment, right? It was probably in the early, I would say, late 19th century, right? Around the 1800s, 1850s, you had this situation. And then, from that point onwards, probably in the 1880s or so, you see that, the cities of Paris and Barcelona were built, and I mean, in the sense the water and wastewater infrastructure was built around those cities because there was a big issue around epidemics, right? Because when people are using the river water directly and throwing wastewater into the rivers, I mean, these cities actually built the first water and wastewater networks, and Suez was part of that exercise as well. So I mean, there were huge pipelines that were built, and that is when the water came from the river into the taps of households, right? And that actually improved the public hygiene, and it reduced the epidemics, and kind of reduced the mortality rates of people, and life expectancy increased, right? And then from that point onwards, I think the kind of, I would say, the second inflection point happened in the World War II, right? When we had, I mean, when the World War II happened, it was post the World War, there was a rapid urbanization of cities across the world. I mean, across Europe, across North America. And obviously, from a basic requirement of providing water to the taps of household, the urbanization put an extraordinary stress on the resources, right? Because you had limited space. And that is when really, a lot of effort had put in. I mean, there was innovation around how can we do, consistent water quality, right? It was not about just water coming into the homes. It was about consistent water quality, 24/7 supplies. And those are the times when, again, technology was disrupted, and in the water industry where, there were smart designs which were made, the space was limited, you had a lot of tools being used, and, and that was the 1945s to 1960s, in that range. And again, there was a huge digital transformation. Again, at all these times, you had the people, processes, and the technologies all moving together at the same time, right? And then probably after the 1960s, I think the focus went on to the water scarce regions, right? In the deserts of Egypt and Israel, and all these places where there were a huge amount of water scarcity because of the desert regions or because of the coastal areas, right? And that is when the technologies of ultrafiltration and desalination was introduced, the reverse osmosis and all that stuff in the 1960s to 1970s. Again, there was an inflection point where kind of the old technologies went out and the newer technologies came in, and so that's where the transition happened to, again, a set of new technologies giving water to these water scarce regions. And all along there was automation part of it, again, with a focus on the environment, focus on the customers.
In the next 10 years, is there a big thing you expected to change? We are coming out.
I mean, so I think on the pandemic side, I think the whole point is, we are now going into a circular economy from a linear economy, right? I think that's the biggest change that we are going to see in the coming worlds. I mean, you have very, very little resources. I mean, 2.5% of the world's freshwater is going to be the available freshwater for 7 or 8 billion residents in the next 10 years, right? And so everything has to be recycled. The oceans have to be recycled. The plastics from the oceans have to be recycled. The water has to be recycled. The wastewater has to be treated. So I think there is going to be extraordinary stress, and which is where the digital piece would come in, really. And look at artificial intelligence, and whether you look at IoT, all these things. I mean, with these big cities, like whether it's Mumbai or Paris or Los Angeles or other places. I mean, they've got huge water wastewater networks that have been built over time. But now the challenge will be, how do we actually convert this into a circular economy from a linear economy? Wow. And that's where the impact of digital will come. But it will only, again, if we take it along with the people and the processes in place. And technology as such may not be, because these are all 100, 200-year-old systems that have been put in place, and they have people who actually have built it. And I think technology will really connect the two, the people and the processes here.
Got it. Thanks, Girish. It's been great. Thanks for sharing the history of how the company was created and the inflection point, the journey of the organization. and ending with the focus on circularity. We had Preet talk about how the whole simulation is becoming central of how products are being built. Tom talked about sustainability and how future of work is changing. And then Ashok, coming to you, you build the systems, what people use to build products and manage products. So how are companies changing in terms of building their newer digital solutions and systems? What are some trends there?
Yeah, I think thanks, Pari. I guess one of the things what we are seeing is most of the last few, like almost 10 or 20 years, people have been doing digital. It's not like digital is new. I mean, people not using paper processes, but I think that what we are seeing is still 90% of the companies today are digitizing existing process, and maybe I'm moving to cloud, I bring a mobile app, but I'm still doing the same things. And I think with what we are now seeing is the inflection point, what Girish and Tom are talking about. It's really going from, it's almost like we use the analogy of, being a caterpillar versus a butterfly, right? You're trying to transform truly a metamorphosis where the business models have to change. So I use an example of Levi's, for example. They sell jeans. Everybody knows Levi's. With pandemic, all the stores were shut down, right? And so what happens with retailers and others, now the biggest thing they had advantage is, the location of the store, which brands carry them, right? If you go to a particular store, now you don't have that advantage. So how do you connect to the consumers directly? How do you get them a feel of virtual try-ons, for example, if you want to try jeans remotely and virtually? So what you're trying to do is now going from a Levi's, which had 2 million mobile app users, to now 100 million people using it, virtual try-ons. And they're also trying to do something. I want to bring the notion of ESG into this. There's about 6 billion jeans in the world, and they keep thinking that, why would I want to have more jeans introduced into the world where not everything is being used? So Levi's is trying to also bring ESG into it by looking at how do I get people to wear jeans longer. Their campaign is, they talk about buy better, wear longer. So it's about companies not just about making profit, but also, let's make sure customers don't waste. And so the recycled jeans, they got a Levi's secondhand store. So they're using mobile apps and others to do something where not only tell customers don't buy our jeans as quickly as you do, but also use technologies to recycle and make the world better. So I think it's more about bringing new business models, and whether it's Porsche trying to go, you can get a subscription now. You don't compete just on a car. You can drive a Porsche you can buy a subscription, and you can use any Porsche depending on what type of car or summer. That's a different business model, because your TechM, for example, deals with 5G. People need to have mobile apps. You need to know where the cars are, how much money you're paying. So it's a completely different model than just buying a car and taking it off the lot.
Thanks, Ashok. I think very interesting initial comments. You talked about business model, circularity, sustainability, future of work, simulation, a whole lot of things. And Ashok, you ended with the change in business model. Coming back to you, Preet, you have, one is you're a CTO of Ansys, so you almost evaluating all the new technologies and how do you enable, adopt these technologies in the company, but also see your customers adopting all of these technologies. So where does it start? Do they start business model in and figuring out what technology, or are they really figuring out, hey, what is technology Ansys can provide? Let me figure out how to apply the technology. How is the decision making around what use case should they focus on in terms of engineering transformation in your customers?
Thank you, Pari. So in one of the roles as CTO of Ansys is to create our long-term technology strategy, right? So today we are a simulation company. We have amazing simulation products like Ansys Mechanical for structural analysis, fluids for fluid analysis, electromagnetics, and so on. And as CTO, I'm looking at the future of technology, right? So where is technology headed? So we are looking at AI, machine learning applied to simulation, or high performance computing using GPUs to accelerate simulation, or things on the cloud, or model-based systems engineering, or digital twins. So I'm looking at a lot of technology things. And then the sort of second part, and the equally interesting part of my job is I work every day with lots and lots of customers, right? The CTO levels at different customers, and ask them where they're headed, right? So as the auto companies are headed towards electrification instead of the internal combustion engine, I kind of bring them sort of solutions from a simulation perspective, how AI, ML, or digital twinning can help them, say, a Ford or GM move from the internal combustion engine to the electrification stuff, right? Because in electric car, as you know, right, you can come up with a design of electric car being, I have to design a car that will go from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds and a range of 500 miles, right? So you can say, oh, I can go 0 to 60 by having a much bigger motor. But then if you have a much bigger motor, you need a much bigger drive system and a much bigger battery system. If you have a much bigger battery system, then the weight goes up. So you can do, as I mentioned, through virtual validation, you can do all those what if scenarios. Do it very, very quickly. And so you can start with a system level specification and do a very quick design in the new technologies of electrification. So that's how I am sort of working. So first is looking at the long-term technology strategy for Ansys in terms of new areas, and then applying it to see how we can help our customers' business priorities. And as I hear about new customer business priorities, it feeds into the way we do our simulation technologies and so on, like better ways of doing digital twins using hybrid digital twins with combining AI and data analytics. So that's how I think and how I'm providing value to our customers.
Got it. So you're understanding what the customer needs are, then you're looking at what your technology roadmap and applying that and creating new use cases, like where they can experiment on some of these areas. Very interesting. And also use some of the new technology, maybe AI, generated design. So it reduces the amount of, the complexity the customer has to handle. And
one just thing that I would like to mention is that I think in the previous panel, Amit mentioned that the ecosystem play, that things are getting so interesting and complicated that you cannot do it alone, right? So one of the roles I play as CTO of Ansys is not just to bring in sort of the Ansys simulation solution, but the ecosystem solution, right? So essentially Ansys plus this startup plus that startup, right? And putting together a truly digital engineering ecosystem for our customers. So that is an important point that I want us to kind of highlight, the ecosystem that we bring to our partners.
Thanks, Pete. Ashok, you want to comment on the digital engineering ecosystem, how customers are moving into DevOps and especially in the digital, how is the overall product development value chain changing?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question. I think one of the things what we're seeing is that, from a software perspective, typically people had technology teams or agile teams where technology teams work with users maybe, but I think increasingly what we're seeing is that the people are looking at value chain as the value streams. It's almost applying the lean principles because I think the value is not known. When you are using digital, until somebody uses it and get value from it, you don't know what it is. So technology teams cannot just building technologies and shipping them versus how do you bring the business and technology teams together as a one value stream. They start with a hypothesis, what you think is a value, and then you kind of deliver that, getting that experience and feedback and refine it. I think that's one of the things what you will see is increasingly, it's more about not connecting business and technology, but business and technology teams should be one team, fusion teams to continuously learn and improve. And to me, that I think is what anti-fragile is, not just how do I react to change? Because it's like rubber, right? Rubber goes back to what it was, it doesn't change. Whereas anti-fragile is about getting better with change, and the world continues to change. So how do I learn from it and keep continuing to get better?
Got it. And Tom, coming back to you, we touched upon one of the trends is around how the hybrid model is working, and how your engineer products starting to change. You have people working from home, people coming back to office. Maybe you can tell us, what's your plan on getting people back to office? Maybe start with that and then get into how you think in a long term, the engineering collaboration, how you build products is going to change.
Yeah, I'll touch on that really quickly. We're going to go to a flexible work schedule. It depends a little bit if you're in the factory or not, but more of a 3 days in the office, 2 days out is the trend that we're headed to. But I want to comment on a couple themes. I see the same trend on the value streams, really where the business, IT, engineering teams really have to collaborate together. And it all goes back to that the systems that we're working on are extremely complex. So it's really testing that hypothesis or figuring out what problem you're trying to solve, and then getting those teams to collaborate in a way that they've never had to collaborate anymore. I mean, typically we'd get a spec and you'd go away and design stuff. It's almost on a daily or every half day kind of sequence that we're going. And it comes into two elements that I'll touch on. One is we're doing less actual, and I am in the industrial space, but spending less time on web app and mobile app design and coding, and more using some of our APIs to get to those solutions, make sure the business teams really value those as outcomes, and then we quickly flip to the web and the mobile, and it's helped speed up and allow us to iterate faster. And then on the QA side, the forever almost religious debate of whether you manually or automatically to do automation testing, really see machine learning and algorithms and user leveraging that to develop better user testing in QA systems that need to be more automated and more sophisticated.
Got it. So and also right now, if people are all working from home, and there's a shift in technology. And Preet, you talked about there is the major. You're looking at roadmap. You're looking at what are the new technology coming in. But how do you ensure your engineers? I'm looking at some of the questions that are coming up from audience, and Preet, feel free to just type in your questions. We'll start picking up your questions. So one of the questions is, how do you make it lean for? One is you understanding technology and figuring out the roadmap, but on the ground, the engineers have to execute on it, and they might or might not have the skills. And a company like Ansys has been around for a long time. You have deep engineer with deep experience, but how are you now kind of retraining them, reskilling them? What methods as a CTO is that a role you're looking at, kind of solving for the company?
Thank you, Perry. So a very, very big thing that I also drive is our Ansys Academic program.
Okay.
It goes into the brand new engineers that are going to universities as well as the reskilling. So let me talk about the brand new engineers, right? So we work across more than 1,000 universities in the world, right, where we provide access to our software essentially for free. We donate the software. But we are seeing in the academic setting sort of a big digital transformation happening in education itself, right? So in the past, students used to go to the classroom, right, and listen to a lecture from a professor. I mean, I used to be in academia myself for 20 years, so I have seen that. But increasingly, that content is being available, distributed on the cloud, right? It's online, on courses like edX and Coursera and so on. Students also used to go to the lab in a university and learn with a hardware prototyping in a lab. Now, the way we are positioning ourselves is, okay, as the universities are moving towards online content, online lecturing, we are complementing that online content with online labs, with online simulation and cloud. So essentially, we are embracing the whole digitization of the university setting in engineering education, right? And that's how, and essentially, in the past, you have to go to MIT or Stanford to do engineering. Here, you can be in a village in India and have access to the same content and same engineering simulation, right? You don't have to go to MIT. So that's fundamental change in the way we are training.
It would be a bigger business for you than Ansys simulation business.
Precisely. And so the other thing is how we are now, you asked a question of reskilling, right? So we have a Ansys Learning Hub, where essentially we provide free, right, a whole bunch of sort of courses, and it's like academic, right? You want to learn about fluid dynamics and so on. This content, these are like lecture content, freely available on the web, tied with sort of access to our tools running on the cloud. So here is an engineer sitting at Honeywell, right, who probably learned the technology of engineering 20 years ago and wants to learn about external aerodynamics, right? Can go into the Ansys Learning Hub and take the online course as well as the courses on the lab, right, with sort of simulation on the cloud and reskill themselves. So we are doing it at both level, at the university level for fresh students, as well as reskilling the talent for the future.
Very, very, very interesting. I think you have another, $1 trillion idea in terms of driving that. It's going to be a major, major industry. Ashok, coming back to you, you are one of the, I think, younger companies of this four, right? And how you adopt, so is that a way you build products internally is starting to change? And because there's a war for talent currently, which is getting accelerated across the world, in the US, in India, China, anywhere else. And a company like Google or any other companies who are looking to hire talent, they can hire anywhere and their compensation brand is higher. As a up and coming company, how do you now think about talent attraction, talent management, development? So what's your philosophy? Has it changed in the last 18 months?
Yeah, no, I think we are definitely in unprecedented times right now because people are able to work remotely, where people can hire. I mean, it used to be location was important, but now I think companies like us are focused more on what do people care. I think the developers, engineers today, it's not just about what they work on and why, and so it's important for them what problems they're trying to solve. So we kind of look at, we are focused on looking at the latest technologies like AI and other things, but I also think we need to allow people to be creative because I think more and more we say AI is the new UI. So how do we the younger generation, it's not just about what they're working on, they want to know why. So we kind of focus on if we can help companies achieve their purpose, see the value in the work they do. So I think to me, that's part of the newer generation is all about, not only what and just making money versus, they just want to make some meaningful contribution. So we're kind of combining that, giving them an opportunity to, work with helping the largest companies and making the world safer in a digital world, because, you don't trust anything anymore. How do you know that what you use an app is actually going from the customer or the bank? So I think those are the things what excites a younger generation now. And so we compete more in the context of helping improve their skills and working on the latest, but also providing something meaning more than beyond work.
Got it. Thanks, Ashok. I think, Tom, there was a question to you on green premium. So how do you see it? On the sustainability, there is a point of view that says focus on sustainability is going to increase inflation because cost of products is going to go up because of green premium. And Girish touched upon circularity, but great to hear your view.
Yeah, listen, there's a lot that goes into this question. Sometimes regulatory and funding clearly drives it, but there's other areas that there is clear payback just on its own in terms of the energy savings, less water uses, pesticides. So we still see there's a lot of very sophisticated customers that are looking at it. The question is correct. It's not just you can just write a blank check and it'll all equal out. You really have to look through the business models. You really have to look at all the details.
Got it. And Girish, when we are talking about talent, one of the questions is around how is you run the India operations, right? How is the global talent? How do you see companies using global talent going forward? Tom also mentioned about engineering travel. Going down, only customer travel has been a focus. The fact that teams cannot travel back and forth to customer site, but deploying some of the solution you're working on. But how is it changing? Is it a positive, negative for companies which have global hubs?
No, exactly. I think, Pari, the key issue is, with the travel now, really going down. We used to have people actually in the US, in the Europe, be there for 6 months, work with the teams, understand what's going on with the customers, get the work back home. So that was the pre-COVID era, right? Now in the post-COVID era, I think the last 18 months, what we have been focusing on is to actually create one teams, right? I mean, the focus is the moment you have one team where you have the same team comprising of people in Europe and in India working on one project as one team, I think there is no us versus them and a you versus me stuff. And it's actually more seamless, and then the conflicts are much lesser. So I think this COVID has really brought that perspective into the fore, that it has to be a one team concept, and wherever you are, everyone works for one project and works for the profitability and the customer for that project. So I think that's what we are driving, a one team concept.
Got it. An integrated global team
Yes,
across
integrated. Yeah.
Okay.
And so it's no more that you do something there and transfer some work down here, do some task here, send it back there. So it doesn't work that way, because in this model, I think the next 12, 18 months and going forward, I think this is much more harmonious and much more sustainable, having one team work on one project.
Got it. I mean, coming into Preet, one other question here is, you talked about the digital engineering ecosystem, how you're building it together. One, we talked about talent, your talent, how you reskill your talent, how do you work with a global team. But how do you bring these interesting startups to your fold? What is your process of selecting and identifying the companies? If somebody wants to be part of the Ansys ecosystem, what should they be doing?
So actually, I will come to your question, but I also want to highlight a point that Girish was saying, right? What the COVID situation has done is has allowed us to recognize it's possible to collaborate globally, independent of being boundaries, right? We used to think that all our developers had to be in Pittsburgh, right? We're a Pittsburgh-based company, or in San Jose, or in India, in Pune, and so on, right? In the pandemic, people could not go to the offices. Therefore, people from Cannesburg or Pune had to work together. Well, how do you do that on the cloud? So essentially, collaboration on the cloud has been accelerated because of the pandemic. And once that has happened, it is not going to go back, right? So we, in response to this, we are changing the way our simulation will work, right? Just think about Google, the G Suite set of tools where multiple people can edit the same Word document, right? Without being physically in the same conference room that we used to do in the past, right? You and I used to write together and so on. Now you can collaborate on using G Suite, right? On the same document. Same thing is happening in the engineering world, right? You can actually take a design, a CAD on the cloud, right? For tools such as Onshape, and then simulate on the cloud and so on. So what we are doing is taking a 5-year strategy on cloudifying all our applications, right? Taking our large monolithic software, breaking them into sort of microservices, providing Python APIs available on the cloud and so on. Now where startups come in is, in the past, startups did not know how to integrate with our tools. We are now making all our APIs available, right? So that if you are a startup, you can tie into one of our solvers on the cloud and build a very, very interesting app. For example, here is a person who wants to create an app for an eye surgeon, right? To do just an eye surgery. We are partnering with a company called Optimo Medical to come up with an optimized app who will actually do the laser surgery of the eye using Ansys solvers in the backend, something that we could not do in the past, but now because of the cloud, you can do that. So there are lots and lots of sort of third-party app developers and ecosystem partners that we're trying to support through simulation. Very similar to Amit's work on the Edison platform that he mentioned, but we are doing it from a simulation perspective.
Very, very interesting, Preet. So one of the, this question for everyone. So one of the things we hear from usually CEOs of companies is, hey, culture is a problem. We want to get people back to work. You don't have water cooler conversations, and people are not able to interact, and then the serendipitous innovation is not happening. But based on what Preet, you mentioned, and what Ashok mentioned, and Girish mentioned, so it seems like the systems are in place to drive this innovation remotely. So what is really the need? Is just the CEOs are used to going around the block and managing? Is that their style? They're not changing their style. So what is? Anybody comment on it?
I think it's more about focusing. I think in the past we all focused on trying to get work done, and how you measure work is output. How much people got done. I think it's focusing more on outcomes in terms of, it doesn't matter if somebody works 40 hours or not, but give them outcomes and empower them to achieve it. So it doesn't matter where they work, how many hours they work, and I think focusing more on the value and outcomes, I think, is the way to do it, because that way you trust people and they collaborate, and not about having to monitor them all the time.
Got it. Anybody else? Any comments on that?
I think the freedom that people get out of working from home, I think that has drastically improved the productivity and creativity of people. I think people find the way to communicate, collaborate, innovate, right from their homes. I mean, there's nobody, no manager, holding a gun onto their head that they have to complete this by this deadline. I mean, actually what I've seen is the productivity has gone through the roof in the last 18 months. And quite shocked. I mean, despite all the poor network connectivity and all the power shutdowns that we face in India, I mean, people want to be free, right? I think freedom makes a big difference to the way you work.
Yeah, I think before Slack was optional, we're on Teams. It's not going back. I 100% agree. The cloud tools advanced it. It's the way it will work. It'll be performance-based outcomes, and the CEOs will just be able to walk around 3 days a week versus 5 days a week.
Great. I think we are run out of time. Thanks a lot, everyone. It was a great panel, short and deeply insightful. Very exciting to see how technology is starting to evolve and enabling engineers to be productive, innovative, and collaborative seamlessly and in a very integrated manner across the globe. I think it's very powerful, something we have learned as a community over the last 18 months. And I think that's going to fundamentally change how, even like what Preet mentioned about how you even train your engineers. And these engineers can work in an infrastructure which doesn't have to have very expensive lab infrastructure, which we need to create right now. So it's fascinating, the engineering efficiency, innovation. It looks like it's going to accelerate. And truly, this engineering function has become a lot more anti-fragile. Thanks a lot. Thanks for your time. Over to the hosts at Tech Mahindra.